Okay, welcome to Summer Sessions 2021. We are going through the book of Revelation, so thank you for everyone joining us tonight, and thank you for everyone online. Just so you know, I don't have eyes on the Facebook feed on stage, so if you are asking a question at home, is there anyone here who wants to volunteer to just peek at Facebook? Okay, cool, nice. Yeah, so, all right, so if there's any questions that you guys have, just put them in the Facebook feed, the comment section there, and we'll try to get to those during the breaks. As usual, there'll be one in the middle, one at the end, and again, thank you for agreeing to do that. Appreciate that. Okay, let's go ahead and pray and get started. Father, we gather tonight in your name to seek you through your word that you have given us. Lord, Revelation is a challenging book, but it's also a tremendously encouraging and tremendously edifying book. And so the things that are in it that will build us up and unify us and help us to more accurately and to better reflect your glory to this world, Lord, we pray that you would help those things to stick tonight. I pray that you'd help me to communicate well, and that you'd help my brothers and sisters to listen well, and just be with us as we seek to meet the challenge of understanding this beloved book of Scripture. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. I was told you should serve at E-Town. Yeah. Yes. So if there's any doubt in your mind, just want to put that out there. Okay. So tonight we are going to cover Revelation chapters 4 through about the beginning of chapter 8. At least that's the plan. If for some reason it takes a lot longer, we might be doing less than that. But this is all part of the second vision of Revelation. There are 4 visions in total, kind of depending on how you count, but that's what we're going with. This one goes actually all the way through the end of chapter 17, but the reason we're considering it one big vision is because everything that happens in these chapters is connected in 2 big ways. So everything that happens in essentially chapters 4 through 16. So first, by the setting. John, more or less, is in the heavenly throne room of God, and he remains there until the angelic messenger wisps him away, at the beginning of chapter 17. And second, by the way in which stuff is shown. So the vision is comprised by a series of seals being broken, and then trumpets being blown, and then bowls being poured out. And each series is kind of nestled inside the last one of the previous series, kind of like those Russian nesting dolls, okay? And so the content, in other words, of the 7th seal is the 7 trumpets. The content of the 7th trumpet is the 7th bowl, and it all comprises one big happy vision. So let's begin. Chapter 4, verse 1. After this I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice, which I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet, said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." And at once John finds himself in the Spirit, standing before a throne in heaven. So let's start with the slow ball here, okay? Who is the one speaking? Who is the first voice that sounded like a trumpet? Jesus, right? From chapter 1, okay? So Jesus invites him into the throne room, and then stuff really starts to pick up. Now, one thing I'm not going to be able to do is explain how each of the major interpretive approaches that I've told you about here would handle each and every part of Revelation. I'd love to do that, but for one thing, in a lot of places, I myself am not sure. And for another, that would be a ridiculously long trek through Revelation if we did things that way. But for those of you who are interested in comparing what each school of thought would say, I don't usually recommend books typically because I forget to bring them. But a really good resource to have is this one. This is by C. Marvin Pate, and it's called Reading Revelation. And so it gives you this brief introduction that describes the general characteristics of each approach. And then most of the book is comprised of 5 columns. And the first column is the Greek text. It's the whole book that goes through it in 5 columns. And the first column is the Greek text with an English translation. And then the other columns are the preterist view, the historicist view, the futurist view, typically the dispensational futurist view, which I've mentioned what that is, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then the idealist view. So the way that I've broken them up is how they are in this book. And it goes through telling you what each view says of each passage. So it's a very, very handy book, kind of like, I think that anyone really interested in studying and comparing these views, this is really important book that you should own, I would say. I mentioned this here because it's now in chapter 4 that approaches really begin to diverge. So as the seals are broken, the trumpets are blown, the bowls are poured out, many preterists, would tend to see what's happening there as the 3 successive stages of the fall of Jerusalem under the Roman Emperor Titus, or the General Titus. First, the campaign against the north, which is Galilee and Samaria. So that would be the seals. And then the invasion of Judea in general, which would be the trumpets. And then the siege of the conquering city and the conquering of the city of Jerusalem itself, which would be the bowls. So seals, trumpets, and bowls. So that's an example of like a way that one of these approaches would handle the material in the first vision, or second vision rather. Dispensationalists, on the other hand, believe something else entirely. So recall that this position is characterized by an understanding of salvation history that sees itself as kind of divided into different eras, dispensations, typically 8. So you've got innocence, conscience, civil government, promise, Mosaic law, the dispensation of grace, and the future kingdom. And so all of history is kind of broken up into those different ways that God kind of relates to humanity, different things that he's doing in history. Today, according to this, we would be in the church age, the dispensation of grace. And let's note here that that does not mean that grace was not operative or the means to get right with God in previous dispensations. Especially after the influence of the very influential theologian Charles Ryrie, that's been emphasized. But at any rate, dispensationalists believe that at the end of the church age, at the end of the age that we're in now, Christ will return and will remove the church from the world in an event called the rapture, allegedly described in 1 Thessalonians 4. Which says, "For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God," right? And so what did we just hear in Revelation 4:1? A trumpet, or a voice like a trumpet, right? "And the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord." So it's also common among dispensationalists to see John and his coming up here as kind of like a symbolizing of the entire church. But either way, under this way of looking at things, the rapture happens, and then the second vision, Revelation 4-16, happens, which describes a 7-year period known as the Great Tribulation. Other important passage very important passage for this would be Daniel 9. Don't have a lot of time to get into that, but if you do want to ask me that in the Q&A, that would be maybe a good time to slide that in. But for most part, that's the seals, trumpets, and bowls. And then you have the judgment of the great harlot, as well as the beast, and then the fall of Babylon, and then the ultimate return of Christ in chapter 19. He saves Israel, who is left on the earth. Remember, the church is out of there. And then he sets up his kingdom on earth and reigns for 1,000 years until the final defeat of Satan and the great white throne judgment. Now, the idea of a future great tribulation is very important in this view. And that phase, as I said, allegedly begins here in Revelation 4. A very common argument in favor of this is that the church, in terms of like the actual word, ceases to be mentioned in Revelation until we reappear with Jesus in chapter 19, following him, who he is a rider on the white horse, on our own white horses, the armies of heaven arrayed in fine linen, white and pure. This, however, is this observation that the church isn't mentioned during these chapters is a little bit weakened, I think, by the fact that saints are mentioned on the earth in these chapters. So, for example, in chapter 13, the beast from the sea makes war on the saints and conquers them. And there is a call for the endurance of the saints. Those are verses 7 and 10 of chapter 13. And then in chapter 14, it's echoed in verse 12. So I'm not sure that the argument is as strong as it's sometimes made out to be. Although, in fairness, one could always say that the saints mentioned in this passage are Jewish believers converted during the tribulation, or perhaps even Gentile believers converted during the tribulation. In my estimation, the true reason, though, to be skeptical of the dispensational scheme, at least the elements that I've kind of been talking about so far, and the reason, by the way, I'm spending so much extra breath on it is because it's a very popular view. I don't know about you, but the church that I kind of grew up in was like very gung-ho about it. And that's fine, that's cool. It's not like crazy or anything. It's a legitimate way to read the book of Revelation. But one of the reasons, the things that kind of make me a little bit skeptical about it is that the key event, the rapture of the church, the removal of the church, is not actually taught in Revelation, right? It has to be read into Revelation and then assumed. Now, in response to this criticism, sometimes people will point out one of the promises of the church in Philadelphia. Because you have kept my word about patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world to try those who dwell on the earth. But that's in chapter 3, verse 10, and I just leave that to you, how convincing you find that. I can't speak for anyone else, but that seems to be a little bit of a stretch. So let me put it this way. Right, if you're just reading Revelation and didn't know about the concept of a rapture, would you infer that the church has been removed from the earth during the unfolding events of chapters 4 through 18? Probably not. This idea has to be read in from the outside. And the same goes, by the way, for the fulfillment of the land promises to Israel during the millennial reign of Christ, right? Chapter 20 actually doesn't say anything about that. That doesn't prove that dispensationalism is wrong, but it does raise some real questions, some would say doubts, and it means that a lot hinges on the interpretation of one single verse, namely 1 Thessalonians 4:17. The other connected issue, and then I'll get off this topic, although I'm sure you'd want me to talk about the Great Tribulation the whole time, is that no passage tells us when the so-called rapture of the church is going to take place in relation to other end times events. There is an argument that can be made for it from 1 Corinthians 15, but that, in my opinion, is not particularly clear. But so if you're reading, say, 1 Thessalonians 4, where do we get the idea that the rapture will happen before a future great tribulation? Nowhere. Okay? Rather, it's an inference based on a proposal of how these things could fit together. Okay? And this is one reason why a variety of modifications on classic dispensationalism have arisen, notably the mid-70th week view and the post-tribulational rapture, which I personally am pretty warm towards. So, so enough of that, okay? Let's look at the throne room. What John sees is a throne room in heaven with one seated on the throne who has the appearance of jasper and carnelian. And emanating from his throne, in verse 5, is something like a storm, flashes of lightning and rumblings and peals of thunder. And there we have that tricky thing that we saw in the introduction to the book. Before the throne, 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God, John's description. And of course, I argued there that that's, to me, appears to be an apocalyptic way of referring to the Holy Spirit, the perfect Spirit of God, number 7, although, that's not entirely clear. And this storm with the torches spreads out before a sea of glass. And we'll come back to that in a little bit. Then there are what appears to be concentric circles around God. And the first is a rainbow. The second are 24 elders. That's what they're called, seated on thrones, wearing white garments with golden crowns on their heads. And then what Revelation calls living creatures, which are pretty much the equivalent to what the Old Testament speaks of when we read of cherubim, okay? So these are creatures that are composites of various animals, often lions, bulls, the wings of birds, usually eagles, with human faces. And their iconography is known throughout the ancient world, at least as early as 3000 BC from the city of Ebla. Here, I've just given you a couple particularly well-preserved examples from the city of Dur-Sharukin, or sometimes called Khorsabad, which is known as today. This is a city that's a Neo-Assyrian city that's been excavated. It is the capital of Sargon II. He's the guy who reigned over Assyria from 722 to 705 BC. Actually, the one who basically did the final conquering of the city of Samaria, the northern kingdom. He's mentioned once in the book of Isaiah. In Assyria, these creatures are called Lamasu. And here you could clearly see, right? The body of a lion, the feet of a bull, the wings of an eagle, the face of a man. The picture on the left, I believe, is from the Louvre, not to be confused with the Lou. And although that would be cool if that was what the bathrooms look like here. And then the picture on the right is the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago. It's kind of cool. Upstairs is a school where you go to classes, and then downstairs is a museum where all kinds of stuff from their excavations have been placed. And so it's a really cool place. If you're ever in Chicago, it's a free museum, and they do excellent work. They also make most of their publications available for free online. So University of Chicago is an awesome place with this stuff. But yeah. These figures typically represented power and prestige. So to be clear, here in Revelation, these elements are separate, right? So one creature is like a lion, the other is like an ox, the third just with the face of a man, doesn't even say what the rest of it is like, and the fourth is like an eagle. But it's pretty standard fare, right? Like they're typically mixed up every time that you see them. They're a little bit different. The ones in Ezekiel 1, for example, each have 4 faces. Here in Revelation, they surround God's throne, and day and night they never cease to say, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." And when they do this, the 24 elders cast their crowns before the throne and praise him. "Worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created." And now that image from God's heavenly throne room is basically drawn from various Old Testament theophanies. That is, appearances of God. That's what a theophany is. That's a nice 50-cent word for you to throw in your next Bible study. Okay. In terms of its structure, it's really close to our old friend Daniel 7. It's pretty cool, actually. There's a number of very close parallels, and the number of them, that how many you count, varies depending on how you count. But it is impressive. And it isn't just that that it shares elements of Daniel 7, but it's actually a lot of them are actually in the same order. Okay, so just kind of ping-ponging back and forth. After this, I looked, as I looked. And then a little bit down, a throne stood in heaven with one seated on the throne. Thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. He who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool, right? Description of deity. Then from his throne came flashes of lightning, rumblings, and peals of thunder. Before his throne were burning 7 torches of fire. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came forth from before him. And then you have the multitudes who surround him, the appearance of one like a son of man. So then going in Revelation into chapter 5, right? Spoiler alert, Jesus appears and is given, basically assumes dominion over all creation. So there's a lot of kind of patterning, it seems, after Daniel 7 here. But let's consider a few of the other details of chapter 4. So first, God is seated on a throne, which is obviously a way of portraying him as the king of the entire cosmos, ruling. Okay, the vision of God from Ezekiel 1 is also similar in this respect, where we also find, as I mentioned, 4 winged living creatures containing elements of humans, bulls, lions, and eagles. Ezekiel also sees 4 great wheels accompanying them. It's kind of like a weird thing. It's actually UFOs, right? No. Possibly wheels of God's throne chariot. Okay, note how in Ezekiel, God's glory is moving, right? Out of Jerusalem to Babylon and then back to Jerusalem. Notice too that God's frequent designation as the Lord of hosts enthroned above the cherubim, right? So this is like a mobile throne. Those wheels are covered with seeing eyes, while here in Revelation, the wings of the cherubim are covered with eyes. And although other possibilities suggest themselves, these eyes seem to symbolize their all-seeingness. No big secret there. They see all that is going on. But unlike Ezekiel, these creatures have 6 wings. And what does that sound like? Sounds like the seraphim from the vision of God in Isaiah 6, the theophany in Isaiah 6. For various reasons, the seraphim there are probably serpentine, dragon-like creatures. Also notice how similar the praise is in Revelation 4 to what is uttered in Isaiah, where they cry out, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." Second, in Revelation 4:3, we're told of a rainbow with the appearance of an emerald surrounding God on his throne. Now, this appears to be drawn, anyone who knows their Old Testament well, from Genesis 9, where God establishes a covenant with all creation. It's often called the Noahic covenant, the covenant with Noah, right? And the essence of that covenant is given there in verse 11. "I will establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." And the bow then that's placed in the clouds is established as the sign of that covenant. So the implication of the rainbow appearing here seems to be what? That God is the one, that God is there and he is honoring his covenant with all creation by withholding judgment. But it's also very clear from even those chapters in Genesis that by no means should this be taken that mankind is not accountable to God for his sin. Right, just because he's not going to destroy the world with a flood. Even there's this acknowledgement that the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth, Genesis 8:21. Also, one thinks of the moral accountability for bloodshed. "For your lifeblood I will require a reckoning," Genesis 9:5. And so while God's disposition is one of peace, there's still the reality of God's judgment that is acknowledged in his covenant with Noah. Now, the identity of these 24 elders who are also present, closer to the throne of God than the cherubim, is one of the more disputed details of this chapter. To put it simply, and they appear a bunch of times, so it's kind of worth thinking a little bit about who these guys might be. To put it simply, are they glorified human beings, perhaps representatives of glorified human beings, or are they angelic beings? So, a few things that might indicate that they're human beings. So first of all, they wear crowns, okay? And eternal life with God is often symbolized as a crown, okay? In fact, it's not clear. Aside from this, there's no angels who wear crowns in Revelation. For example, in the words to the church at Smyrna, be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Or Philadelphia, hold fast what you have so that no one may seize your crown. In chapter 6, verse 2, chapter 14, verse 14, okay, are also other important texts in that respect. They also have white garments on, which, again, seems to be the raiment of believers in heaven, of human beings who are glorified. So again, the letter to Sardis in chapter 3, verse 5, the one who conquers will be clothed thus in white garments. To Laodicea, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire so that you may be rich, and white garments so that you may clothe yourself. Then in chapter 6, during the fifth seal, we see those who have been slain for their witness, the martyrs. These are the ones under the altar, okay? And they were each given a white robe and told to rest a little bit longer. Also, we see clothed in white garments, the great multitude of chapter 7, who we'll talk about in a little bit, and the armies of heaven in chapter 19, which I already noted is probably the church, probably Christians, whether you're dispensational in orientation or not. And then finally, thrones. So also another big thing in Revelation is that God's people will reign. Okay? So in chapter 20 in particular, when we're into the 1,000-year reign of Christ, right? The millennium, we see that those who had not received the mark of the beast on their foreheads came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. And then in the next verse, verse 5, over such the second death has no power. They will be priests to God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. Okay. And then also, note, how many elders are there here in Revelation 4? There's 24. Okay. And now 24, remember, numbers in apocalyptic literature are usually symbolic. In fact, you're kind of hard-pressed to find any that aren't. And so 24, obviously 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles. So 24 together, they can be used to symbolize the people of God. Or you can multiply them. So we've got 144,000 of chapters 7 and 14, and I realize that's a little bit controversial, so we will get to that. But you've got 12,000 from each tribes. And then another interesting passage is Revelation 21, where you see the New Jerusalem being let down out of heaven, and we're told that it had a great high wall with 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and on the gates the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel. And then he looks down 2 verses later at the foundation, and it has 12 foundations, and on them are the names of the 12 apostles. So again, 12 and 12, symbolizing the people of God. So that would be, kind of the argument for these being humans. Now, angelic beings. What's the argument in favor of that? So, first of all, in apocalyptic literature, angels often are usually the ones who serve as revelatory guides. So those are the ones who come and speak to the seer. And in Revelation, often that's the role that the elders have. So in just a little bit, in chapter 5, verse 5, one of the elders said to me, "Weep no more, for behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah." And then in chapter 7, verse 13, one of the elders addressed me saying, "Who are these clothed in white robes, and from where have they come?" And I love John's answer. He's like, "Don't ask me, you know. Why don't you tell me that, Mr. Smarty Pants Elder?" And notice also that in chapter 5, verse 8, the elders present incense, which is said to be the prayers of the saints. Okay, so they seem to be distinguished from the saints there. And you have that distinction even stronger in chapter 14, verses 1 through 3. They were singing a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and before the elders. Okay, so who's singing? The people of God, the 144,000 there. Okay, and they're singing before the elders, and no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. I think like the chord progression is really tricky, and they're just good at it. So like, you know, and then all of the passages that talk about that you might look at, and you might be like, well, sometimes they're distinct from angels, though, if you look like the elders. So, for example, in chapter 5, verse 11, everyone starts singing, and it says, I heard the living creatures singing, and I heard the elders, and I heard the angels, right? It might just be that the elders are like the highest order of angels, right? So they're closest to the throne of God. You also see that in chapter 7, verse 11. And then, interestingly, thrones is sometimes used in the New Testament seems to be used to denote spiritual powers, spiritual authorities. So Colossians 1:16, for by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. And often those words are used to denote spiritual authorities. And then the only other thing, there's a bunch of other things you can note, but the only other thing I'll say is that the white linen I don't think is particularly determinative, because elsewhere in the New Testament, guess who wears white linen? Angels. Okay, so think of the ones who announced Jesus' resurrection at the tomb, whether it's one angel as in the Synoptic Gospels or two as John points out. I don't think there's a conflict there, but also when Jesus gets taken up into heaven, who appears to men clothed in white, right? And the 24, right? That there's 24 of them symbolizing the people of God. Remember what we said about the angels of the seven churches, right? That angels accompany the people of God and somehow assist them or oversee them, or God's delegated authority over his churches. And that may simply be, these are 24 highest angels, and they have some special connection to the people of God. So this is one of those things where it's like, I'm not sure which one it is. If I had to go with one, I'd probably say this is the highest order of angels. But if you're not crazy if you think that these are saints somehow. All right, here's a particularly cool part. So check out what is said in verses 5 and 6. From the throne came flashes of lightning and rumblings and peals of thunder. And before the throne were burning 7 torches of fire, which are 7 spirits of God. Before the throne there was a sea of glass like crystal. So, okay, let's go kind of backwards through this, right? So first of all, the sea of glass, okay? Now we think of that and you think of like, I don't know, I think they had this at the CN Tower in Toronto. I remember they used to have it when I lived in Chicago in the Hancock building. Like you could go up and stand and there's just glass, it's just glass, and you look down and it's super far down and you're like, oh, and then there's kids that are like, you're like, please stop, right? The NIV translates it clear as crystal. Thing to keep in mind, though, is if you're in the first century, how clear is glass? It's not very clear, right? And neither is crystal. In fact, the word that's translated there, clear by the New International Version, hualinos, actually means translucent rather than transparent. So here, for example, is a Roman intaglio seal. So this is kind of cool. So it's a seal, and you can see it's made an impression on clay, and that's crystal. That's Roman crystal. So the sea of glass kind of looks more like an actual sea, right? It's kind of like the murky greenish blue of sea. So if you've got bright enough light behind it, you can see something going through, right? But it's not like you just see through it, okay? So that's kind of the idea. Now, it's also significant that it's said to be a sea. Because sometimes, like, if you're trying to picture, like, what John saw, right? Like, I don't know, sometimes I'll picture it, maybe it's like the size of this stage or something, but it's a sea. He describes it as a sea, right? Like, so this is huge, okay? Huge. And then, and also keep in mind that especially in like Old Testament and somewhat in the New, is the sea like a happy place? Like, let's go out on our like fishing boats and stuff. No, the sea is a terrifying place. It's a place of chaos. It's a place where like bad things happen. The Israelites were not a seafaring people. Okay, and even when they start to do that, right, it's with assistance from the Phoenicians. So Hiram of Tyre has a covenant with Solomon and with his father David, and that's when they're going to Africa and they're bringing back peacocks and gorillas and stuff like that. Okay, on seafaring vessels, the Israelites are freaked out about the sea, right? And you kind of even carries over into a lot of New Testament stuff, which I think clues us into when we get to the vision of the new heavens and the new earth, and it just drops that note, and the sea was no more. And you're like, what is it just saying? There's no fishing allowed in the new heavens and the new earth? What is that? No, this symbol of chaos, this symbol of this is where scary things lurk. So it's a frightening thing. A lot of the elements of this vision, if you really think about them, are frightening. Not only that, but think about it, this sea of glass like crystal, right? Think about a couple of other theophanies, right? There's your 50-cent word again, in the Old Testament. So first off, think of Exodus 24. This is where the covenant of Moses is established. So the elders and Moses and Aaron are invited up the mountain, right, to meet with God, to establish the covenant. It's actually the covenant, it's a ratification of the covenant. It's not a formal establishment. The actual cutting of the covenant happens in chapter 19, and this is the upholding, the establishment of it. But it reads, verses 9 and 10 read, "Then Moses and Aaron and Nadav and Abihu," those are Aaron's sons, "and the 70 elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel. And there was under his feet, as it were, a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness." Right? So picture that, right? Like they're seeing apparently like a semi-clear floor above their heads, right? With the God of Israel above it. This separation, this distance. Now think of the throne room, the sea of glass, right? Or Ezekiel 120, chapter 1, also to the rescue here to help paint this picture. Bunch of verses here. So pick up in verse 22. "Over the heads of the living creatures," so these are the cherubim, "there was the likeness of an expanse." That's the same word from Genesis, the rakia, the expanse, "shining like awe-inspiring crystal spread out above their heads." Okay, so again, the mobile chariot of God, the cherubim are moving, the wheels are moving, but above their heads is an expanse. "And there came a voice from above the expanse over their heads. When they stood still, they let down their wings. And above the expanse over their heads," verse 26, "there was the likeness of a throne in appearance like sapphire, and seated above the likeness of a throne was a likeness with a human appearance." Likeness, like this. Like you feel like the language is failing him here, right? And then verse 27, "And upward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw as it were gleaming metal, like the appearance of fire enclosed all around. And downward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw as it were the appearance of fire. And there was brightness around him, like the appearance of the bow that is in the clouds." Again, remember, rainbow in the throne room of God. "On the day of rain, so was the appearance of the brightness all around." Okay, so you kind of get the picture, right? That like we're down here, up there is God, but this sea is separating us in this kind of like quasi-mythic language of the Old Testament, like the way that it's described, this biblical imagery. Also note that what's going on here in chapter 4 are these flashes of lightnings and rumbles and peals of thunder, right? Just like going out from the throne. And you can imagine, as I said, remember I said with like the crystal, if stuff bright is happening behind it, you can see that that's happening, but it's not like clear, right? And again, the sea of crystal and this crazy electrical storm happening, right? And you could think of the sound, okay? And I don't know, I used to live in the Midwest. I lived in Chicago for like 10 years. And I remember I was living on campus at my seminary in Deerfield, Illinois, and we had like this married student housing, and I had like a place where it's like a little one-bedroom place, and where Jamie and I lived, and they had this sliding glass door, and I'd wake up early in the morning, and they had the craziest electrical storms. And I know they get worse in some parts of the world and even the North America, but it's like nothing here. Like I hear, you definitely get some electric in the skies here, but there I would wake up and I would just feel like terrified. Like, you ever go on a plane and the turbulence happens and all of a sudden you're like, this is get right with God time. I'm nothing if this thing goes down. Just this feeling like I'm nothing in the presence of this awesome display of nature. And like right outside, the sky is lighting up like it's day, and it's like 5 a.m, and the windows are rattling because it's so loud, and it's right there. It's this is a frightening thing. And this often accompanies theophanies of God, this storm imagery. So, Exodus 19, on the morning of the 3rd day, then this is Mount Sinai, right? There were thunders and lightnings in a thick cloud on the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast. There's the trumpet again, right? So that all the people in the camp trembled, okay? Like this huge, electrical thing going on. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now the mountain was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. And the smoke went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. Imagine what that must have been like for the mountain itself to tremble. I think it's also significant, by the way, that when Jesus dies on the cross, what does Matthew tell us accompanied it? A great earthquake. And then it says, as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, so you could just imagine, it's almost like, you might want to clip that out, and that we can use that in the commercial for next year's summer session. But Moses spoke, and God answered in what? In thunder. Okay. You also have storm theophanies throughout the Old Testament, notable ones, Psalm 18, verses 7 through 15, Nahum, chapter 1, verses 3 through 5, which kind of raises the question in my mind, is this all literally happening in heaven? Right? And I think my answer to that is, I have no idea. I don't know. Okay. I think what is going on is that, there's a bunch of things going on. Obviously, biblical imagery is being recycled here, right? And that's the first thing we're to latch on to meanings, right? And so, I will still pray to God as the one surrounded by the 24 elders and the 4 living creatures, right? That would be a way to address the Lord. And even though I understand maybe it's not exactly like that, maybe it's what these things symbolize. Actually, an interesting, a really good teaching on Revelation that you can check out. I think it's on YouTube. D.A. Carson of the seminary where I went to school, he's got teaching all throughout Revelation, and he's got this awesome part, I wish I remembered in which section it was, where he describes what it would be like going to a primitive tribe in Papua New Guinea and trying to explain to them electricity. And you've got this spirit that goes through vines and makes fire and things like that, But yeah, just think about going back in time, 100, 200 years, describing the internet and the kinds of images that you would need to describe things that are just on a whole nother plane, right? You go back to say the time of the founding of our nation, you can't explain electricity, right, accurately, let alone the fact that there are computers, let alone the fact that there is glass where you see pictures of human beings, realistic and lifelike, where you could see people at the same time talking to you. You know what I mean? Like, what are the words you would use to describe that? And so, and the interesting thing, the cool thing, this is a point that John Walton raises in his Genesis commentary. That was like a pretty big eye-opening thing for me, is that at any point in human history when if God had chose to make his revelation known to us like today, he would still have to do that. Right? It's not like we've finally developed language to describe the transcendent God of the universe. No, he'd still be speaking in kiddie language to us to communicate truth about him. You have to be careful, right? There's a lot of the Bible that's not like that. But clearly when you're in genres like apocalyptic, you're wading in that kind of territory. So now let's go to chapter 5. I'll try to be a little bit quick about this, and then we'll break for some questions. Then I saw in the right hand of him who was seated on the throne a scroll written within and on the back with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look into it. And I began to weep loudly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll and look into it. So John starts bawling like a baby here, right? So what does he see? He sees in the right hand of the one on the throne. So again, think about how frightening this image of God is, how undomesticated it is, right? Like there's a sea of glass. There's these crazy like you think that they saw lion creatures and were like, "Oh, no problem. Hi, how you doing?" Like, no. And there's this crazy storm theophany going on, right? And in his right hand, he's like, "Who wants it?" And what is it? It's a scroll written on the inside and on the back. Now, a couple things to keep in mind about this scroll. So if someone wanted me to say, you're reading Revelation, what is the content of the scroll? I think, and again, Carson describes it this way, a good way to summarize the content of the scroll that we see as the events unfold, that these are God's purposes for blessing and judgment. Okay, just kind of general, his dealings with humanity, both blessing and judgment. Now, the significance of the writing on the inside and the outside. So, when you had a particularly long document, okay, but a document that was important enough that you didn't want to lose half of it and write it on 2 scrolls, you wrote it on the inside and on the outside, even though it's kind of inconvenient because scrolls are made with parchment, right? And what's parchment? Parchment is you take these fibers from these reed plants from Egypt that grew in the Nile Delta, and you make a sheet of them just next to each other, and then you put another row of them totally perpendicular, and then you just glue them together. And so what side do you want to write on? You want to write on this side, on only one side, because that's the side that goes from right to left. Okay, whether you're writing in Hebrew, right to left, or in Greek, left to right, that's the side you want to write on. But if you really run out of room and it's a really important document, you want to keep it all in one scroll, you turn it over and you inconvenience yourself by writing over the bumps of the vertical fibers, you see. And this scroll is rolled up and it's sealed with 7 seals. Okay. Now, and there's no one worthy to come break the seals. Now, I want to say something about what the significance of breaking seals was on a scroll. So, in the ancient world, if you had an important document, say it's a last will and testament or a legal decree from a king, right? You would have it written out, the master copy, and then anyone else who needed to know what it said would have copies made for them by scribes. And so the scribes would have knowledge, so other people would know what's in the scroll, but then you roll it up. And this is what you do with the original one, and you seal it. Now, all these other copies, maybe there's some corruptions in them, okay? They tell you generally what's in there, but maybe someone's messed with it a little bit or changed the wording or something like that. So if this is a legally binding document, okay, it's not legally binding until you read the actual original scroll, right? So the breaking of the seals means it's time to enact what's in this, okay? If it's a will, it's time to apportion off the estate. If it's a law, this law is now being announced, and it's the law of the land. You get the point. So to break the seals means that these things are now in force. They're now happening. And there's no one worthy to do it. In heaven, all right, anybody in this scene, or on earth, anyone in this scene, or even under the earth, even dead people, there's no one who's ever lived who is worthy. And so John breaks down and cries. And one of the elders said to me, "Weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals." Now, a bunch of those designations are important. Notably, let's just say he calls him the Root of David. This is a reference to Isaiah 11, which is a very cool messianic prophecy. This is the shoot of Jesse, right? But then Jesse, obviously David's father. But then in verse 10, "In that day the root of Jesse, who shall stand as a signal for the peoples, of him shall the nations inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious." Okay, so this is one of the titles that Jesus bears in heaven. "And between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders," so again, remember the living creatures are on the outer circle, and then you have the elders, right? "And among the elders I saw a lamb standing." So he's told to look for a lion, and what does he see? A lamb. And it's not, well, is Jesus a lion or a lamb? The point is he's both. Okay? Now the lion, we know this is fierceness, this is power, okay? This is even intimidation, right? But now here we have a lamb, and how's the lamb described? As though it had been slain. Okay? Now that slain, esphagmenon, okay, is a violent death. Probably death by sacrifice. And how are lambs slain for sacrifice? You take them and you slit their throats. Okay? Like a dead animal, the tongues will stick out and stuff. And that's what he sees. But he's not dead on the ground. He's walking among the elders. Okay? And he's coming. And this lamb has 7 horns. And he's got 7 eyes, which are the spirits of God sent out into all the earth. And he went, and this lamb, okay, this beaten and bruised lamb that should be dead, it's like a walking dead lamb, okay, went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who was seated on the throne. Just walks right up through the cherubim, through the storm theophany, across the sea of glass, right up to the one that everyone's just, holy, holy, holy. And just, I'll take that, Dad. I will take that, Father. So now a bunch of these things. One interesting thing too, of course, is that Jesus. We're talking about like progressive Christianity on Monday nights, right? And a lot of progressive Christians will say that we make too much emphasis about Jesus' sacrificial death on the cross. What we need to be really emphasizing is the way he taught us to live, right? Of course, we would say, well, why is this an either or choice? Are we crazy? But I will note that here, right? What is the central characteristic about Jesus? And this is not his death, right? And this is not the first time that Revelation has centered us on this, right? When he first sees John, I am the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive, and I hold the keys of death and Hades. Okay? This So even in Jesus's like quasi-exalted status, he still retains the identity as the lamb slain before the foundation of the world, and on the cross. Horns in apocalyptic literature often denote power. He's got 7 of them, perfect in power. Eyes, right? Probably omniscience, awareness, 7 of them. And the 7 eyes, it says, are the spirits of God, right? He sends forth the Spirit. And as a result, all fall down and they worship him. Worthy are you. Everyone in this scene that just, is so intimidating you wouldn't even want to go near it. Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals. For you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. And you have made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth. Then I looked and I heard around the throne the living creatures and the elders and the voice of many angels, numbering myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands. That's millions. Saying with a loud voice, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing. You know what's kind of cool about that? That sounds a lot like what they just praised God, the one on the throne, the Father, the one on the throne with, right? But what did he get? Glory, honor, and power. Here, Jesus shows up. He gets power, wealth, wisdom, might, honor, glory, and blessing. Right? And that's not to say that the Father doesn't get that too, right? In fact, there are ways in which Jesus is subordinate to the Father. But nevertheless, I think it's noteworthy that here in the worship, and this is worship, in the throne room of God, of Jesus Christ, more things are ascribed to him than are ascribed to the Father. These beings who only worship God, in other words, they still worship God. They're worshiping Jesus. They're worshiping the Lamb. And it ends, I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and in the sea and all that is in them, any creature made, okay, saying, to him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory and might forever and ever. And the 4 living creatures said, Amen. And the elders fell down and worshiped. Okay, let's break for some questions. And, if anybody wanted to mosey on over to the thermostat and bump it down a few degrees in here, I wouldn't oppose that. It's like automatically resets, so you might have to do it again in a few minutes. But, all right, yes, okay. Okay, any questions? And if there's anything on Facebook, anything come in on Facebook there?
There is a comment that was made earlier.
Why is Doug so ugly?
No.
Okay. Good, because that would have hurt my self-esteem. Please don't write that on Facebook.
They're referring to the cherubim.
Yeah.
Saying very different than the cute little cherubs.
Yeah, the cherubim, very cute. Yeah, very different than the cute little cherubs is the comment, right? Yeah. Yes, I often think that, right? Like, this isn't a naked baby with wings looking to shoot an arrow into your butt to make you fall in love. These are fierce. The idea is fierceness and the inapproachability of God, this combination of complete transcendence with one who loves us and will dwell with us forever by the time we're at the end of the book. So, yeah.
And the same person, she also says, she likes the part about the holy, holy, holy that they sing about.
Yeah, the singing of holy, which is also something to be noted, right? Holy, holy, holy. Okay, by repeating it 3 times, right? Like this is, in fact, it's interesting. In the Hebrew Bible, the way you say holy, holy, holy is, or the holy of holies, rather, the most holy place, is often just kadashim, holies. You just pluralize the word holy, right? And what you mean is most holy thing. Okay, and this is the only, shall we call, attribute of God that happens with, even though there are other attributes that are true, right? So you never find righteous, 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 or omniscient, 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 or love, 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 okay? It's holy, 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 which is one of the reasons why I will say that if we can speak of a primary attribute of God, of which all the others are functions, I think it's holiness. Oh, was it a Trinitarian thing that it refers 3 times? Could be, although I'm not sure what the biblical argument would be for it. So, yeah, I mean, possibly. I've actually never thought of that before, but yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's on Twitter. Well, there you go. So it definitely is, yeah. So, yeah, gotta be true, yeah. Yeah, those filters wouldn't let something like that slip. I don't know, maybe. Yeah, if there's, yeah. What's that? The glassy sea, yeah.
Why is the glassy sea and the lamb is in the middle on the glassy sea?
Yeah. Why is the lamb on the glassy sea?
Why is the glassy sea?
Why a glassy sea? Well, I think, again, I think glass, because it's described as other things elsewhere, like a sapphire kind of thing elsewhere. I think this is just like John trying to describe what it looked like. And for him, so in other words, you could say it's a crystal sea, and it basically looks the same. You could say it's a sea of glass, and it basically looks the same because glass pretty much looks like every other precious stone back then. Right? There's no like gem cutting techniques that they have to make these beautiful, brilliant diamonds and stuff like that. So I think the appearance is roughly the same.
It's just a description.
I think it's a description, but I think the idea too is like it's this kind of like this precious, costly thing that, again, is that has almost the appearance of something in nature, but also has this, you can walk across it. But I think Jesus walking across the glassy sea to get to the throne is significant if we're supposed to infer fear from the fact that it's a sea. Like who would dare to cross that and walk up to the throne? And the Lamb does, because he owns the place, Yeah.
And he's holy.
Yeah. Yep.
Or where they reference the whole sapphire bit.
Or where they reference the sapphire. Is that what do we mean by that, Ben?
You mentioned, it's in scripture somewhere about walking on sapphire.
Yeah, walking, the pavement like sapphire. Yeah. So sapphire, again, like it's the same general appearance, I think. It's safe to say. Yeah, it would look similar. Yeah, especially if like light is coming through it, and depending on the angle, maybe it looks a little bluish, maybe it looks a little reddish. Yeah.
Or the description of the throne where it has like the carnelian and the emeralds
Yep. Yeah.
description.
Yep. Let's do Curtis and then Jeremy. Yeah.
Okay, so I just, when you were talking about that, I started thinking about the creation account is just, I haven't studied it too much, but there's like that kind of sea, but then like a sea, almost like a canopy type thing. Is that maybe talking about like the throne room there, or?
Yeah, so the question is like in the creation account, you have the waters below and the waters above, and then you have the firmament created, and it's hard to kind of connect that with the thing in actual creation because it says that there's waters above it, and so like what would that actually be? There's different opinions on that. One opinion is definitely that, the ancient Israelites did believe that there was a solid firmament above. And so like, you could kind of like imagine, so then this thing with God walking on this sea or pavement or rakia, as it's called in Genesis, that would be like the way that they would have thought reality actually was, right? So like, if you actually throw a stone up, you would hit something, and on the other side of that thing is God, right? And he's got his waters there, and I'm not sure. I think that there's other ways to read that. I mean, just as convincingly, I think it can be described as phenomenological language, and whether Christian or not, experts in the iconography of the ancient Near East, disagree as to whether or not the ancients thought that the world was actually like that. No doubt it's described in like things, like you have the pillars of the earth and things like that, and the earth as a round disc or the disc of the earth or something. But the fact that they describe it like that, does that mean that they actually thought it was like that? Like even today, we can speak of things like the four corners of the earth, the sun setting, and I know it's a little bit different today, but so that's kind of debated. I guess the best way to think of it is it's debated. I don't think it's required, by the Bible. Certainly some people think it is.
But that has like no relation to like the sea that's talked about.
It could. I mean, if you're connected, if you want to say that the Old Testament sea, that the Old Testament pavement under God is connected to that firmament, and that this is connected to the Old Testament pavement, right? Then I could see that, yeah, like someone might make that connection, but I don't know if I would be confident that that view can walk on all fours. Yeah. Jeremy.
What is the reference to Daniel 9 that you had considered?
Oh, the reference to Daniel 9. Great. We're already late. Thanks a lot, Jeremy. Okay, so I'm just going to be kind of quick about it. So Daniel 9, okay. The fact that I can't find Daniel, no, just kidding. Here we go. So Daniel 9, verses 24 to the end of the chapter, okay. 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity. Okay, sounds like Jesus kind of stuff is going to happen. 70 weeks, okay? And so the idea is that there's 7 sevens, and there's warrant from elsewhere in the book for reading those sevens as years, and also from a passage in Jeremiah. So 70 sets of 7 weeks, so 490 weeks total, right? To bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Know therefore, in other words, the plan of God is something that is envisioned as unfolding over this set of 70 weeks. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem, okay, which could either be the decree to build the temple in Ezra, which would have been 458 BC, or it could be the decree in Nehemiah to rebuild the city, which would be 445 BC, so we're not sure when this kicks off. But from that word to the coming of an anointed one, which I don't think is actually talking about Jesus there, or the interpretation would be this is not yet Jesus. This may have been, say, Ezra, okay? A prince, there shall be 7 weeks. So 7 weeks. So 49 sevens, okay? Or a prince, other people. It would be other people throughout Jewish history could be identified as the priest, as the anointed one, rather. Sorry, I'm kind of just going from memory here. But then, for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and a moat, but in a troubled time. And after 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and have nothing. And that would refer allegedly to the cutting off of the anointed one, who would be identified as Jesus. Again, we're going real fast through this, okay? And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Fall of Jerusalem, stuff like that, right? Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. So now there's another week, okay? A 70th week. So there's a big pause from the cutting off of the anointed one to now the prince, okay, who makes a covenant with God's people, Israel, as dispensationalists would see it, for another week. And how long is a week? 7 years, right? That would be the Great Tribulation. And so that's Daniel's 70 week. And on half of the week, so time times and half a time, that's 3.5. Time times 2 more, and then half a time, 3.5. Okay, 3.5 years. He shall put an end to sacrifice and offering, which is why dispensationalists will often say sacrifices will have to be reestablished in order for this stuff to happen. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate. Note that Jesus in Matthew 24 says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in, yeah. So until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. So then the end of the tribulation. So Daniel's 70th week was, how they would plug that into this view of eschatology. Also, the Daniel 12:1 also allegedly refers to the same period, the time of Jacob's trouble, okay? This period of tribulation. Any other burning questions? Okay, cool. Let's go on to the 7 seals. Huh? Like that? All right. I worked on that all afternoon. Not those seals. Okay, the 7 seals. So, the 7 seals. So, Jesus starts busting open the seals, right? And the first 4 of them are those who are affectionately known as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Okay? So you get, and so these guys on horses start riding out, right? And you get the first one on a white horse, the second one on a red horse, the third on a black horse, and then the fourth on a pale horse. And each one, there are descriptions of each. And each of these, there's kind of like are kind of semi-formalized, because what happens is the Lamb breaks the seal. And then one of the 4 creatures, the 4, cherubim creatures, calls forth the rider, okay? This idea of 4 horsemen is probably taken from 2 of the visions in Zechariah, where you have different horses of different colors, notably from chapter 1, where they're sent out to patrol the whole earth, and they find, interestingly, peace on earth. And that's not a good thing, because the only reason there's peace is because God isn't ruling, because somebody else has conquered the world, and it's a false peace. We want to go into that now. And then in chapter 6, you have 4 different chariots going off in different directions, each drawn by a different course of a different color. And this probably just means, not that it means the same thing that it does in Zechariah or anything, but just that when you're delving into apocalyptic, 4 horsemen is something you could reach for to symbolize stuff. You like how specific I am with that? Okay. Also noteworthy, think about like Matthew 24, Jesus' Olivet Discourse. He talks about the coming end, and part of what he describes is, immense suffering that will have to be gone through, such as has never been seen since the beginning of the world, right? So the first horse comes out, the white horse. And as far as, so now it's a rider on a white horse. Does anybody else know who rides a white horse in the book of Revelation? Notably chapter 19. Jesus does, right? And so one idea is that this might be Jesus, and that's not completely insane, but I don't think it's required either. It's a little odd, would be a little odd for the rest of the content of the chapter, which is basically just like destruction and horror. Although, those who hold that this horse rider, Jesus or a Jesus-y type thing. So preterists, for example, would say that this is the gospel, conquering, going out to conquer, because look what it says, right? That I looked, and behold, a white horse, and his rider had a bow, and the crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. Okay, so possible. But it's also possible that this is denoting war. Okay. And one slight indication that it might not be Jesus is the crown is given to him, which kind of seems like, he doesn't have authority, but it's given to him. But then again, I don't know how definitive that is, but that would be one kind of weak thing against it being Jesus. But so it's unclear. It could be Jesus or the gospel going forward, but it could also be war. And I think either of those are valid. I lean towards the latter just because, again, it's the tenor of the chapter in general is judgment and bad stuff happening. The second one read, though, seems a lot clearer, right? Which tends to be civil bloodshed. Okay, so war is a military coming out and conquering. Civil bloodshed is, you've got this rider on a red horse, and he takes peace from the earth. Right? Like the peace that enables there to be, the social contract. The purge is not happening, right? Takes that away. And what do people do? Does the military come and conquer them? No. people slay one another, okay? And he's given a great sword. And then the third horse comes out with the third seal, and this is a black horse. And this seems to be the collapse of an economic system of some sort, okay? So he comes out with scales in his hand, all right? Because this is going to, he's essentially an ancient cash register, if you will. Like, how much does this cost? Well, how much does it weigh? Okay. And he comes out saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine. Okay. Apparently, this is about somewhere between 10 and 12 times what those things would actually have cost in the first century. Note that wheat also is more valuable than barley. Barley is what you eat if you're poor. Wheat is a little bit of a finer thing. But even if you're buying barley for a denarius is easy to remember because it's about a wage for a day laborer, right? Could hardly feed a family off of that, a small family of 3, right? You get 3 quarts. A quart is about what a person would eat in a day. So it seems to be some kind of economic woe. And this do not harm the oil and the wine. I'm not exactly sure what this means. I'm not exactly sure anybody is. But I think the best stab at it is, you have war happening, civil unrest happening. Don't harm the oil and wine. What produces oil and what produces wine? Olive trees and vineyards, right? And a conquering army, if they can kill, they can slay, and if they really want to do permanent damage to an area, what do? They dig up the trees and they salt the ground, right? I think that's what it is. Basically, please don't harm the oil and wine, that kind of thing. And then finally, the fourth horse, the pale horse, which fittingly symbolizes death, right? I think there's good reason why it's pale. It's so much nicer in here that it's cool. Thank you for getting up, changing the temperature. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. Remember, Jesus has the key to both of those, but they're still on the loose now. And they're given authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill with the sword and with famine and pestilence and by wild beasts of the earth. And that fraction will become significant as we start comparing that with other things in the first vision, which we'll see next week. So we'll come back to that, the significance of the 4th being killed. And then the 5th seal is open, and what does he see? No longer horses, but now I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. So apparently an altar in heaven, okay? And they cried out with a loud voice. So these are martyrs, right? O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? You remember I noted last week, those who dwell on the earth is code in Revelation for unbelievers, specifically people who are actively opposed to the kingdom of God. And then they were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. So note here, as we saw with the letter to Smyrna last week, right? This reality of intense suffering for sincere believers is around the corner. That if Revelation is written towards the end of the first century, this means that believers have already experienced Nero, the Emperor Nero, using them as kind of his scapegoats, especially for the burning of Rome, and are about to enter suffering under Emperor Domitian. It still is a little spotty, persecution, but it's worsening. And this reality that there is death. We read also in the letter of to one of the churches of my faithful witness Antipas, who loved not his life to death, right? And they cry out, right? O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood? Now, I don't think that we have to read this as they're just bloodthirsty and vengeance, right? You killed us, let's see them get smashed, right? But this is a call for God's just judgment, right? In other words, a call for God to vindicate his name, because the fact that God's people, those who are his, right, are being killed, are getting slaughtered down there, what does that say about God's justice? Right? This is happening. Okay? Now, of course, we see God is sovereign over this. Christ is opening these seals and these things are happening. Okay? But just left there, if things were just left there, there'd be real questions as to whether or not God is truly just and God is truly righteous. And so I think that I read this as a call for God to vindicate his name. They are given white robes, symbolizing purity, okay? That they belong with God, they belong in heaven. The general way to think of someone wearing a white robe in the New Testament is they are a resident of heaven. And also, and this is, a little bit interesting, until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete who were to be killed. So apparently there is a number of martyrs, a number of people who will die for the name, for the word of God and the testimony, as Revelation puts it several times, that God is allowing to happen in history, and after this will come the end. There was a question last week about events that have to happen, and this would be one of them. Of course, we don't have a number. Apparently, it's quite a few. And then we have the sixth seal open, the great day of God's wrath. So we read, "When he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth, and the full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken with a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place." So think about what's going on, right? So far, stuff that's been like very earthy, very natural, and now all of a sudden, it's going down, right? The stars are falling out of the heaven. The moon is blood. The sun goes black in the middle of the day. The sky is rolled up like a scroll. Every mountain and island is removed from its place. The kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling on the mountains and rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand?" Now this is interesting. And there's a bunch of different things that we could take from this. But I want to note that a lot of this stuff appears elsewhere in the Bible as symbols for God's judgment going down. So Joel 2 is specifically potent with images from here. So check out Joel 2, verses 10 and 11. "The earth quakes before them, the heavens tremble, the sun and the moon are darkened, the stars withdraw their shining. The Lord utters his voice before his army, for his camp is exceedingly great. He who executes his word is powerful, for the day of the Lord is great and very awesome. Who can endure it?" So Joel is foreseeing this day of the Lord. And then in a couple verses later, verses 30 and 32, which are right after the verses that Peter said were fulfilled at Pentecost. "And I will show wonders in the heavens and on earth, blood and fire and columns and smoke. The sun shall be turned to darkness, the moon to blood, before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. And it shall come to pass that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." Okay, so what Joel has spoken of is now coming to pass in history, is what I think what Revelation is getting at there. Also, a very important passage is Isaiah 34:4. Check this one out. "All the host of heaven shall rot away, and the skies roll up like a scroll. All their hosts shall fall, as leaves fall from the vine, as leaves falling from the fig tree." So the stars, right, the host of heaven, are falling out of the sky as fig leaves, which is exactly what John says in Revelation. Okay, the verses 13 through 14. And also in Isaiah 2, people shall enter the caves of the rocks and the holes of the ground before the terror of the Lord and from the splendor of his majesty when he rises to terrify the earth. In that day, mankind will cast away their idols of silver and their idols of gold, which they made for themselves to worship. Now, one way that we can look at this is the Old Testament is pointing to a future, can we use the word eschatological judgment of God? Eschatological end times, okay? That's another good 50-cent word. Now you have $1. And now Revelation is saying that judgment has come. It is here, right? Another way to think of it, though, especially with the Isaiah 34 connection here, is that this also appears to be simply imagery of things, of monumental shifts in of what's going on in the world. So, for example, the heavenly host falling from the heavens, right, and the skies being rolled up like a scroll. What's happening there in Isaiah 34? Okay, this is the coming judgment that will happen to Jerusalem. That happened in history. Okay, but it's a way of basically saying your world's going to be turned upside down. So it doesn't necessarily need to be taken as, like something literal happening. This imagery is used to describe how terrible, even war is. All right, you get what I'm saying there. So it's possible to understand it as that as well. But at any rate, that's the sixth seal. Now, still part of the sixth seal is the sealing of the 144,000, which occurs in chapter 7. Okay, so after this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth. So I think, angels in control of nature, that no wind might blow on the earth or the sea or against any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun. So he's coming from the east, possibly coming from Jerusalem. You remember the temple is oriented towards the east, with the seal of the living God. And he called with a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the earth and the sea, saying, "Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we've sealed the servants of God on their foreheads." And so this is actually appears to be based on a vision that Ezekiel had in chapter 9, where you have these basically angelic executioners sent out into Jerusalem. Okay, to execute judgment on the idolatrous and unjust people who live there. And but first, there's another man clothed in linen shows up with a writing pack on his hip, and he's told, "Pass through the city, through Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and groan over the abominations that are committed in it." Right, so a protective mark put on their heads. This is based off that. I'm not saying it's like the same thing, but it's a similar idea. And then the actual sealing happens, right? I heard the number of the sealed, 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. And then you get 12,000 from 12 tribes that are listed. Now, this is a widely debated thing in Revelation, and right now we're going to solve it. So first off, I want to note that this 144,000, it's really just, people who are faithful and good Jehovah's Witnesses. That's the answer. Now, they reappear in chapter 14. Interestingly, they're said to have the names on their foreheads. So it's very likely that it's talking about the same individuals there, right? The seal of God, seal impressions had names on them. Okay. So we just to flag that we are going to see them again, probably the same individuals. Also, there's something funky going on with the listing of the tribes, okay? So you've got Judah listed first, and he's actually the fourth born, but of course that one's pretty easy to figure out, right? Because Judah is preeminent because David is from there and Jesus is from the line of David. But you also don't have an accurate, the tribes are not 100% accurate, right? So the name of the sons of Jacob, right? Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Issachar, Zebulun, Gad, Asher, Joseph, and Benjamin, right? And Joseph has two half tribes that spring off of him, Ephraim and Manasseh. Well, here, there's no Dan and there's no Ephraim. Instead, there's Joseph, okay? And is included as well. So it's kind of like, and Manasseh is one, right? Because if you're actually listing all of them, you get 13. So that's it. Like Ephraim gets the shaft, it's just Manasseh, and Dan isn't mentioned at all. And I don't think anybody really knows why Dan's not there. It could be to signal, if we go with the understanding that these are not to be understood as ethnic Jewish people, it could be a signal to say, like, note the imperfect list. This is not, this is symbolic. It could be a cue to do that, but I don't know how strong of a cue that actually is, but that's one of the arguments. So who are the 144,000? Because if you look, what happens immediately after is in verse 9, after this I looked and behold a great multitude that no one can number from every nation, tribe, and peoples and languages, right? And so the idea would be that the 144,000 are distinct from the multitude that he sees. So he sees them, and then he sees perhaps Gentiles saved during the Great Tribulation, dispensationalists, or perhaps believers, okay? So if these is denoting, saved Israelites, saved Jewish people, could be a remnant from ethnic Israelites. It could be all the Israelites living, or the Jewish people living at the time of whenever this is going to happen. It's not quite clear. But the idea that the 144,000 is actually the people, the whole people of God, is not without warrant. Okay, so I think what the Jewish people interpretation has going for it, of course, is that it says from the people of Israel, right? Like that's what they're named here. But again, we're in apocalyptic literature. There's a lot of symbolic stuff, and we got to just be a little bit cautious. So given the fact that what that has going for it is kind of like the surface, maybe most obvious reading you could appeal to, there's the argument that it's all of God's people is not without warrant. So, first of all, John has no problem linking Gentiles with the New Jerusalem in chapter 21. Okay, and more on that in a minute. But in chapter 21, Gentiles are part of the New Jerusalem. Okay. Secondly, if the numbers are figurative, and it seems like they are, right? 12,000 times 12 is, right? Then one can plausibly say that the tribes that are listed are also figurative. Okay? Third, John seems to be doing a thing in his book where he's calling the church something like a true Israel, right? As opposed to those who say they are Jews but are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Remember that charming terminology from chapter 2, verse 9, and chapter 3, verse 9. Remember also, 12 and 12 seems to be symbolic in Revelation for the whole people of God. As I already mentioned in the discussion with the elders, the New Jerusalem with the 12 gates, and then the 12 foundations, apostles, and tribes of Israel. But note also, then a few verses later, in verse 16, this isn't up on the slides, I'll just mention it. When he measures the city, he says it's 4 square, length is same as its width, and he measured the city with his rod. Guess how many stadia? 12,000. Its length and its width and its height are equal. It's a perfect cube. Okay, and he measured its wall 144 cubits by human measurements. 144. Now, you're like, all right, well, that's great. That's the city. We're not talking about a city here. Well, what are they actually looking at? Spoiler alert, here's a pretty cool thing, right? How does this city get introduced in chapter 21? Well, then came one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues and spoke to me saying, this is verses 9 and 10, "Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." Who's the bride, the wife of the Lamb? The church, right? So come on, let's go see the church. See the church? He carried me away to the Spirit to a great height, a mountain, and showed me what? The holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven. The city is the church. The city is the bride, is the church. Okay? So, and it's measured to be 144, 12,000 stadia. You get the point, right? I'm not totally on board with what's known as replacement theology, where the church just completely replaces Israel. I do think, especially in view of Romans 11, that there is a future for ethnic Israel, that there is, a special part for them in God's plan, if I may say. Paul still says, I preach the gospel to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Then again, the New Testament does have several points where there is a sense in which the church is occupying the place of Israel or becomes true Israel. So Galatians 6:16 seems to call church the Israel of God. Think about the olive tree metaphor in Romans 11, where the natural branches are broken off and the Gentiles are grafted in to the tree, and now they belong there, even more so than unbelieving branches. Think also of like Romans 2, right? What does Paul say there? He says, "For circumcision indeed is of value if you obey the law. But if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. So if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his circumcision be regarded as his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision?" Right? For no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical, but a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. Right? This idea that a Gentile who knows the Lord is the one who is truly circumcised, truly an heir of the covenant of Abraham, whereas those who are physically circumcised but disregard God are not. And their circumcision counts for nothing. Let's see here. I know it's kind of late. Okay. I'm just going to go and just kind of plow through the rest here. I think I could do it in just a few minutes. So after this, I looked. Let me just make sure I'm on the right page here. Yeah, okay, good. My notes are all over the place. After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands. And again, I've just argued that it's plausible to take those as the same as the 144,000. Now you might say, well, in the vision, he sees 144,000, then he looks somewhere else and he sees the great multitude. So clearly they're different, right? Well, I would just remind you, in chapter 4, right, he's told, weep no more, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and then he looks and he sees a lamb, right? And so this idea of a mixing of metaphors to describe the same entity in two juxtaposed things is not totally foreign to Revelation. Means that it doesn't yield easy answers, but since when does Revelation yield easy answers? And all the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the 4 living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, saying, Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power might be to God forever and ever. And then I'll just note that in verse 14, one of the angels tells him that the people who are there, who are praising God in the white robes, okay, are the people who have come out of the Great Tribulation. Aha, there it is the Great Tribulation. Now the $100 question, and we only have $1 because we only have two 50-cent terms we learned tonight, so we need 99 more. Okay, but the $100 question here is Great Tribulation a real technical term for something very specific, a 7-year period, Daniel's 70th week? Or is it just saying, there's a lot of stuff going down? It's a tribulation. Tribulation is often used in the New Testament just in a very plain vanilla way, and it certainly is great. And I don't think that you could tell just by the presence of, so the presence of the word I don't think can be used as an argument for it, the term, but it certainly doesn't cut against the idea either. Therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. And this is interesting. And he who sits on a throne will shelter them with his presence. They shall hunger no more, neither shall they thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them, nor the scorching heat. For the Lamb in the midst of the throne will be their shepherd. The Lamb will be their shepherd. Isn't that interesting? Right? And he will guide them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And it's kind of interesting, right? Like if this were all we had, we might think that this is kind of like describing the end of the world, right? And where we eventually end up. In fact, there's a lot of stuff that's similar to the New Testament, the new heavens and the new earth, right? He will wipe every tear from their eye, okay? Exact same thing that's said there. And how these things all put together, I want to explain it progressively as we walk through the book. So this right now is kind of a question mark. What exactly is this referring to? And then the Lamb opens the seventh seal, and we see 7 angels ready to blow some trumpets. Okay? A little jazz concert about to happen, if you will. And the final thing that I just want to note here that's kind of cool here is that an angel comes and he takes the incense, okay, which is called the prayers of the saints, and remember what those were. Those are identified in chapter 6, verses 9 through 11 as the prayers for justice that the martyrs had, right? I think the 5th seal, right? And he takes that and he throws it down onto the earth. Now, first of all, a very similar thing happens in Ezekiel 10, 1 through 7. So it's patterned after that. But think about the implications of that. Their prayers are for what? For the vengeance of their blood. For God to vindicate his righteousness. And he takes those prayers and it's going to happen. Right? Okay. All right. That's about what I planned to get through. Any questions? And if anything came in online, all right, good. Everything is quiet on the internets. Good. Yes.
I was just looking here about the Great Tribulation. These are the ones coming out of the Great Tribulation. I had found a reference to it possibly being that might be the rapture, or referring to the rapture, and the saints, being saved from a lot of the garbage that's going on.
Yeah. So the reference to the Great Tribulation in verse 14, which we just saw, right? Is I'm just repeating it verse 7 of chapter 7. That might be a reference to the rapture, those being saved out of the Great Tribulation. The standard, again, dispensational way of looking at it would be to say that these are people who are being saved during the Great Tribulation who are not Jewish people. So that would be the standard way. So they're saved because they would say that they're not really saved out of the Great Tribulation. The church is saved before the tribulation, right? They're removed out of the world before it. These ones are being saved out of the Great Tribulation. So if the Great Tribulation is that 7-year period, a capital G, capital T Great Tribulation, then these being saved out of it appear to have been experiencing some of these woes. On the other hand, right, one of the modified views is a mid-70th week rapture, in which case all the bets are off. Okay? So, yeah, I think there's a number of people who would agree.
Is there any chance this could be representing just those
That's how I would, I lean towards that, yeah. Because I don't think we could get that specific, but yeah, I would tend to think of it like that it's God, people whom God has saved through all time. Yeah. The great multitude from every tribe and language and nation, which of course reflects the language of chapter 5, the initial praise of the Lamb. Yes, Aaron.
So, I mean, like you were saying, like numbers are a huge part
Yeah.
of Revelation.
Mm-hmm.
The one number that I saw that kind of had like a, I guess, a interpretation directly was like the eyes of the Lamb,
Mm-hmm.
representing the seven spirits. So I was wondering, are there other older New Testament references to those seven spirits that are attributed to the eyes, or is there any other
Yeah.
insight as to what that specifically is regarding?
Yeah, so the question is about the seven spirits, which are the spirits of God, and that's in the description of the Lamb, particularly in chapter 5, verse, 6, okay? Well, I'm not sure if this is definitely where this is drawn from, but a lot of people will refer to, I'm not sure if I know the exact passage, in Isaiah, where, let me see, I'm going to look into two places, I think. It might be, I might have to come back. If anybody knows the passage I'm thinking of, but it talks about the Spirit of the Lord, the Spirit of this and this and this and this and this. I don't know if I'm just going to find it randomly. I'm not just going to stand up here and flip through the Bible, but there's a passage in Isaiah where it talks about the Spirit of the Lord, a spirit of this and this, a spirit of this, a spirit of this, and I think if I remember, there's actually yes, okay, Isaiah 11, a good old Isaiah 11, Isaiah 11:2. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him. The Spirit, and it depends where you start counting. Do you start counting with the initial Ruach Yahweh, the initial Spirit of the Lord? Or do you start counting with the Ruach Chokmah, the Spirit of wisdom? So Spirit of the Lord, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. Right? So you've got a number of, we would count those things differently. So like knowledge, fear of the Lord, right? And counsel and might. So 1, 2, 3, 4, wisdom and understanding are 2. So Spirit of the Lord, wisdom, understanding, counsel, might, knowledge, fear of the Lord. Those are 7 things. So, and especially as you saw, like the shoot from Jesse comes from this chapter as well. Which you might be like, Doug, why didn't you just find that chapter right away? So that would be that's alleged, that's one possibility of why it calls it the 7 spirits of the Lord. I don't know how strong, I personally don't buy it that much, but then again, it is interesting that in the same vision, he's called something that seems to be directly taken from this chapter, this specific oracle. So it's definitely a plausible way to see that. Yeah.
To answer your question, you're human, not perfect.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I am human. Not perfect, yes. Yes, very human. If you prick me, do I not bleed? Okay. Anything else? Any other questions here? Okay. Well, thank you for sticking with us, and look forward to completing the second vision of Revelation with you next Wednesday. So we will see you then. Until then, God bless you.